Good morning. Welcome to Mantra 108, where we're working our way through the great Viṣṇu mantra, Auṁ Namo Nārāyaṇāya. I like to remind us that the qualities of this mantra are compassion, a sense of deep peace, and boundless love for all beings. When we chant this mantra, we chant it for all beings. Excuse me. When we chant this mantra, we're chanting for the facilitation of the return of the individual, the return of the individual to bigger consciousness, the return of the individual to connecting with our inner light of awareness, which is all a part of that bigger consciousness. So good morning. We will talk today, we'll further our discussion today about the kleshas, these mental, emotional afflictions, and there are 5 of them. We've talked about avidya, lack of awareness, and this is the one that underlines all of the rest of the kleshas. We've talked about asmita, and this is our sense of egotism that gets us stuck in believing that we're more than we are or less than we are. Gets us stuck in feeling superior to others or inferior to others, neither of which is a good place to be. We talked yesterday about raga. Raga, the desire for previously experienced pleasure, getting caught in clinging to our past pleasures. And then today we'll talk about dvesha. Dvesha is clinging to our past sufferings. Yesterday we talked about the problematic nature of clinging to our past pleasures. Now we talk about the problematic nature of clinging to our past suffering, our past pain. So, here's what Nikolai Bachman says about this one. Like raga, dvesha is an emotional trigger based on clinging to past experiences. When we experience pain or discomfort, it's natural to want to avoid that experience again. Dvesha contains in it the fear of experiencing something again. So think about that for just a moment. I mean, any one of us can pull up experiences that were horrendous for us, painful for us, caused us angst or anger or grief. I've just been through one. Being a doula for my dear border collie, making his transition. It was a very painful experience for me and happened just on Tuesday of this week, Tuesday afternoon. So certainly that's not something that I want to experience again. So any one of us can pull up these past experiences in relationships, in being in circumstances where we've been triggered, our ego has been triggered, our emotions have been triggered. We all have these past experiences that were painful for us, that caused us suffering. And of course, we don't want to experience something like that again. If an aversion changes our behavior in a way that is not helpful to us, then dvesha is present. Being deliberately cautious because of a prior hurtful event can serve to protect us and can thus be helpful. But when we suffer from resistance or resentment or revenge, vengefulness, or anger because of a painful event, then our own consciousness becomes affected in a negative way. Avoiding and hiding the pain of a bad experience represses the emotions, burying them deeper in our consciousness and our bodily tissues. This is dvesha. So I want to pause from Bachman for a minute and insert a couple of my own thoughts. And so what he's describing here tiptoes into the area of spiritual bypass. I think that those of us who are living in this physical world, this human reality, and there's so much that goes on that does cause us pain, and those of us that have spiritual practices that help us with dealing through the emotion of our physical pain or our emotional pain. Those of us that have those practices, I believe, have to be cautious of not sinking into spiritual bypass. So what does that mean? It means that rather than acknowledging our emotions, rather than acknowledging the pain, rather than acknowledging, for instance, what's going on around us right now with our heightened awareness of racial disparity, our heightened awareness of the infliction perpetrated on our Black brothers and sisters, rather than really honoring and embracing and diving right into the pain and the anger and the angst and all of the emotions that we feel around this, rather than diving right into it and allowing ourselves to feel those things and letting those feelings be fuel to fire us up, to become activists for trying to make changes in our world. Instead of doing those things, we might tend to just sink into the comfort of our spiritual practices and allow ourselves to bypass the emotional responses that are important for us, that are important in fueling change, fueling our own actions, fueling our own awarenesses. So that's just my little insert here that when we are experiencing pain, and especially pain from past experiences, we don't want to slip into spiritual bypass and just allow ourselves to move right around those painful emotions and sink into our mantra practice or our yoga practices. So he further says, resistance binds and contracts our energy, stifling openness and change. If we resent another person for saying unkind or untruthful statements about us, dvesha has reared its ugly head. The desire to get back at someone is another way dvesha can linger. An eye for an eye only hurts, while turn the other cheek promotes compassion and empathy. Well, I'll stop here and say that I think there needs to be a balance as well. Turn the other cheek is a good thing. Compassion is a good thing. Empathy is a good thing. We all need to employ those things. But I think that we also have to be fierce advocates for what is right. And we have to be very good at discriminating, using our viveka to discriminate wisely. And kind of swim through, pardon my French, all the bullshit to get to the truth of the matter. Anger towards someone because of something they did or said affects us more than it affects them. If we hold on to that anger past the place where it's serving us, then that tiptoes into the area of dvesha. Allowing people to be who they are and where they are is true tolerance. If it's obvious that being around a person is detrimental to our personal growth, then we can minimize our exposure to them until we're strong enough to influence them in a positive way without sacrificing our progress. So I have to say, my unfriend finger has been very active recently. Just unfriending people on Facebook that I am seeing being hateful and not using their own good powers of discrimination to sort out what's true and what's not true in this world. A painful trauma often strengthens dvesha. The traumatic experience creates a deep imprint in memory and an automatic aversion to some or all aspects of the event. This imprint, the samskara, will likely affect how you act in the future, especially when a new situation arises that contains an aspect of the previous trauma. Our heart-mind has been programmed to avoid at all costs anything that might recreate the suffering you went through during the trauma. So then he gives an example here, which I think is a good example. As a young child, you ran off from your parents' view and you were surrounded by 4 barking dogs. Your life seemed threatened and a deep fear of dogs was instilled in you. Since then, even very friendly dogs scare you. Over time, you can move from extreme caution around dogs to an awareness of when it is okay or not okay to pet a dog. Allowing the trauma to inform better, safer habits and then fade as the new habits strengthen will permit the past event to take its proper place in the present. So I think that's a good thing to think about. When we have trauma in our lives, we can set boundaries, we can create safer habits, more well-informed habits, and strengthen those new habits as the past experience or the past habits fade. Every time an aversion erupts in an opportunity is an opportunity to reduce its control of your actions. Future suffering can be avoided if we make a sincere and persistent effort to gain insight into who we really are and how we can consciously act from our divine inner nature instead of unconsciously reacting based on old habits of behavior that are harmful to us. So, some good things to think about today in looking at that 4th klesha of dvesha. Tomorrow, which will be our last day of our 21-day practice, we'll look at the final klesha, the 5th klesha, which is Abhinavesha. Abhinivesha. Abhinivesha. Abhinivesha is fear of death, but it implies so much more than just fear of physical death. So go ahead, I will turn our tambura up. And as I take my sip of tea, please go ahead and close down your eyes. Close down your eyes. Press through your crown so that you can sit a little taller. Drop your shoulders down away from your ears. Begin to soften the skin, soften the muscles. Soften your heart, soften your mind. And we'll take a nice full inhale to begin. Auṁ Namo Nārāyaṇāya. 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 Auṁ Namo Auṁ Nārāyaṇāya. Auṁ Namo 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 Nārayaṇāya. 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 Auṁ Namo Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. That brings us to the end of our practice today. So I'll leave you with an invitation to think about whether or not you are anchoring yourself to either past pleasures or past pain, past pleasurable experiences or past painful experiences. And if you feel like either one of those has you in its grip, I invite you to think about what kind of new habits of thought, new habits of your actions, just new habits in general that you can create for yourself to replace the old habits that may be keeping you, us, anchored to the past rather than living in the present moment and touching into our own Purusha, our own inner light of awareness. All right, I leave you with that today. I'll see you tomorrow morning, our very final day. And on our final day, we'll talk about our last klesha. And we'll also, I'll ask you a couple questions that I'd like for you to leave comments about relative to our next 21-day practice, because I want to get your feedback about how I can best serve you. Have a wonderful day, everybody. I love you.